Denny, how's it going?
I'm all right, Steve. Thanks for asking. Yourself?
Doing pretty well. I got a question for you. I know you teach university and you said you've been very busy reading essays lately. Um, Citations and quotations, and there's one other. How do you, what are these things? How do you explain these to your students?
It's not easy, especially working with students who are from East Asia because they have such a different view on academics and transmitting or sharing knowledge. So, especially things like paraphrasing, taking somebody else's ideas, changing it into your own words, but keeping the same meaning, and doing that effectively is
So you're
very
saying it's
tricky.
not easy. Is it just, I don't know if it's East Asia. Would it be first year university that can be difficult that to understand that when you use someone else's words, you have to give them credit?
I don't think so because I also taught university aged students from Latin America and also from Eastern Europe. So I don't know how representative that might be of the whole world, but I found
So what
typically
should they
they
do?
understood it. So for simple paraphrasing, at least in the American context, what we are hoping people do is that they are changing the grammatical structure, changing active to passive voice, changing the placement of clauses, things like this, and also a substantial amount of the vocabulary. There may be words or terms that you can't change. Place names, people's names, very specific vocabulary that if you try to use a synonym, it loses the meaning or point. But
So you said paraphrase.
right.
There's two others though, right?
Well, then there's quoting.
Okay.
And again, this is where you're taking the exact words, what the words are that you understand them to be. It gets tricky, especially with audio recordings, because sometimes things are mistranscribed.
Hmm.
But if you're putting quotation marks around it, or inverted commas, I guess in British English, then you are saying that these are the original words. And if somebody says something, changes topic a little bit, and then returns to it, and all you want is for that first specific topic, then you can add what we call an ellipsis. And
And
that's
what does that do?
what that does is it shows that the person had said something else and that you are not including it. You're
Hmm.
not including it because it's not pertinent to your point. And you're also
But
saying, yes,
this can also be done with writing, right? Or is it
yes, it
only
can
for
be.
speaking?
So it would be for both. It would be for both. You're correct. And
How would it
again,
work with writing?
with writing, it would still be the same, that everything that is within those quotes is word for word, including any mistakes that the author or the speaker may have had. And if there are mistakes, what you should do is put in parentheses SIC next
I
to
see.
the mistake for grammar or spelling or whatever the case may be to show that you didn't make the mistake, that this was the original.
Right. So when they have done this, they've paraphrased or given a quote. How do they tell you in their essays that this is not their own work?
There are a couple of ways that they could do this. They could have an inline citation. They could say, for example, according to Dr. Yao, comma, and then they could have a colon, maybe, and then a quote. If it's a paraphrase, there would be no colon. And then if they decide they could put where it was, maybe a magazine or an interview on television or something like that, and then a full stop or a period to end the sentence. That's perfectly acceptable. Some teachers or professors prefer a parenthetical attribution afterwards. They might have
What's
the
a
person's name,
parenthetical attribution?
uh, attribution, citation,
Okay.
sorry. And And then it would have that person's name and then the year, or that person's name, the publication and the year. It depends on the referencing and citation system that the student or the writer is using.
Is there a big difference between the two?
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many there are. I'm
Okay.
only familiar with the APA. Where I currently work is the Harvard University system, so I'm familiar with it, but I couldn't start using it without having a reference guide of some form.
Right. I'm familiar with APA and MLA. Those are the two formats that I know. So, quick question.
Yes,
Oxford comma. Where do you put the comma?
I am in full support of the Oxford comma. The,
Could you explain what
the,
the Oxford comma is in
when you
in simple terms?
when you have a list, when you have a list of things, and there are more than two items, so there's at least three. There's at least three items. The question is, before the word and, the second to last, the penultimate object, excuse me, or thing in the list, do you put a comma or not? And it can change the meaning.
Hmm.
I
So, for
cannot think of,
example, if we had pens, cans, bottles, and microphones, just to give an example, four items, where do you put the comma?
well, after the first three, after the
First
first
three.
three,
So the
yep,
Oxford comma
definitely,
would be after the first, after the third one,
third,
right?
that is correct.
And then microphone. So the first three commas. If you don't do Oxford comma, then you're not putting the comma after the
Correct.
third one, right? All
Correct. And I
right.
have read situations where it can make a big difference in meaning. So clarity, I always do
Clarity
it.
and making sure that the students they understand what format is acceptable in for their essays. So this did you what is it called? You said citation. Now, what are there different types of citations, or is there only one way to do it?
Other than with the different systems, showing where you found some information. There are things called footnotes and endnotes. And there are
Okay.
different systems for different books, magazines, professors. A footnote will
Well,
come
let's just
on the,
focus on university because let's deal with university essays. How would we deal with it?
I haven't taught using footnotes. None of my classes have. I only ever used it. And what would happen is our professor for this history class required footnotes. And the footnote, we would have a number at the end of a sentence of paraphrasing
Mhm.
or quoting, and it would be linked on the bottom of that page. There would be, for example, might be one, the first footnote of that page, or two, or three.
Right.
Another page, it might have one, two, three, and so on. Anyway, at the footnote, I would say where the source is and add any other information I thought was important to understand the situation or a bit of an explanation of why I'm including it or some information about the author or speaker.
Why would they include that in the footnotes and not in the essay itself?
Because it's not necessarily important to understand the essay, especially if you're reading it just to understand the purpose of what is going on. But it's more for people who are very interested. And in the situation of the essay, like me, I only did a bachelor's degree in history. If I'd done a master's or doctorate, I imagine footnotes are also used to, or it gives the writer the opportunity to explain why they may agree or disagree with this particular author's thesis or point of view. It's not pertinent to the essay, but it's pertinent to the understanding of the writing.
Of the writing. Also, sometimes it might be a definition. I know a lot of times for footnotes, not so much endnotes, but footnotes especially, you might clarify some terminology that's being used that you don't want to detract or take away from the whole argument as itself. So we have three. We have in text or inline
Mhm.
citations. So
Yes,
that's the author, the year, and the page number.
depending on the system.
The footnote is a small number at the wherever the quote or the paraphrase happens, and then that's matched at the bottom of the page, and
Correct.
that resets every page, or it might not, depending on what system.
And uh, okay, for this part, I've only ever used the APA, as it was maybe 20 years ago also. It may have changed
Right.
because I haven't had to deal with it since then. But yes,
And
it
then
would
footnotes is a small number like a footnote, but the endnotes go at the end of the essay itself. How different would be footnotes and endnotes?
I've never
Is there a
written,
difference?
as far as I know, no. Like you said, it'll be in the back of the book and it'll be in a section usually called the appendix. And what will happen is the endnotes, I've seen it done two different ways. Sometimes it's just a running count for the whole book,
Or
even if
essays,
there's a,
because we're dealing
or
with
essay.
university essays here.
But but also I have seen where if there are chapters, sometimes it'll, in the appendix, it'll say chapter 1, and then it will list all of the end notes, 1 to 10 or whatever. And then chapter 2, you'll have 1 again.
So with all this research and keeping it organized, what do you recommend to students, best practices to follow when they're doing research and keeping their notes organized?
That especially modern times, that's hard because when I was going to college 20 years ago, okay, yes, I did actually have a laptop, but I had notebooks. I had index cards and and I was using microfiche and books. So I would have index cards. And if I saw something I thought was important, I would at least write a portion of a quote that I
What would you
wanted to
write
use.
down? So you have a portion of a quote. What else would you
And
write down?
and I would write down, depending on the situation, if I borrowed the book, took it home with me, then it's easier for me to have the book with me to type in the necessary information, the publisher, all the other information necessary. If not, if
Including
I
what?
can, so, okay, so it would be the publisher, the year it was published, the author, the name of the publication, the page numbers, if it's an article, the page numbers, and then the exact page, if it's a quote. If it's from a book, then the exact page number.
And keep that information all organized on an
On
index
the
card.
index card. The index card where I'm
Nowadays,
taking
I mean,
information.
there's a lot easier ways to do it. Certainly, with the development of technology, computers, tablets, notepads, tablets especially have made this a lot easier. In terms of researching, what would you tell, or what do you tell your students to keep in mind when they are taking these notes and doing all this research?
At least know your local librarian. Even
What
in
if they
modern
don't have a
times,
librarian?
even in modern times, being able to ask questions to a librarian is very useful. The job itself is still very important. A lot of things are now automated, being able to find books and other things like that in a physical library. You don't need a librarian for it. You really don't. The purpose of the librarian, however, is to help you find information. Looking for information on the internet, doing a Google search, I was surprised by this. I've been using the internet since 1996. And are you familiar with Boolean operators?
Yes.
Okay, they are taken away. You cannot use them in Google anymore. You can't use them in the other search engines. And Boolean operators will help limit your search. For example, you want essays that have cats and dogs in it. So you put cats and dogs. Well, that will limit the search. Nowadays, if you do a Google search, all you've done is doubled or tripled the number of articles you're looking through.
So what do
my
you tell
meaning,
your students to do since they
well, this
can't
is the
use, no
librarian.
one's going to use Boolean operators anyway.
Well, well, unfortunately. But what librarians can do is help you to look through specific search engines or databases in the field you're looking into. This was even true 2002. There was a lot of already, like JSTOR. JSTOR is one of the bigger ones I can think of. And
Right.
librarians can help you to find it.
So I would add to that when they're talking to a librarian, because certainly a librarian will do a lot of the, I would almost say the easy and the heavy lifting work at once, but then being able to tell which sources are actually appropriate is a skill that needs to be developed. Because even without using the librarian, if we rely on Google, we shouldn't just take the first search. This is what I tell my students. You should look through the first 10 and then make sure you check where those sources are coming from, what type of website they are, who's writing it, who's publishing it, how long it's been on the internet, whether or not it's been updated, and if there's any sort of newer sources as well. What do you think?
It gets into really complicated matters because different
Look for
countries look.
university essays. 1 second.
Yes.
University essays. For
Even
university
so,
essays, what would they
e-
have to think about?
when you're using search engines, your results can differ depending on where you are.
All right. Well, so they have to keep this all in mind when they are looking at this, certainly where they are. So if they're searching at home, at the library, or using a different browser, they do have to be aware. What would be one tip that you could give university students who are writing maybe their first university essay? What should they keep in mind most of all when they are submitting their essay to their instructor?
Start as early as possible. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to want to be able to ask questions, get clarifications. And it is better that they come a week or 2 weeks than 1 hour before the deadline. When it comes 1 hour before the deadline, there might already be another student who has another 10 questions to ask.
Right. All right. Well, good. Hopefully that helps a few people make their way through their first university essay, as I know it's it's essay writing time, and a lot of people are developing their arguments as we speak and doing late night research. All right. Thank you very much, Denny. Appreciate it. We'll talk again about our next issues next time.
Have a good day, Steve. See you later.
Thanks. Hey, bye bye.
Bye.